Hello, welcome back to the Fruit of Grisaia. Continuing reading Sachi's past. It would be a full 3 days before I woke up again. When the nurse noticed my eyes were open, she immediately called the doctor in charge, who conducted a quick examination on the spot. After determining that I wasn't so severely impaired as to cause difficulties in ordinary conversation, the doctor began to explain many things to me. Uncle Akihiro, who came running over to the hospital, soon joined in as well. That day, Mom and Dad had been in a traffic accident right before my eyes. Just as I ran out toward them, a truck with a drunk driver behind the wheel had barreled through the intersection, ignoring a red light. Hit head-on by the massive vehicle, which had been traveling at 60 kilometers an hour or more. My dad died instantly from massive force trauma. Mom had miraculously survived, but at the moment she was still unconscious, fighting for her life in critical condition. When I learned all this, I didn't cry in grief, and I didn't explode with anger against the man who'd caused the accident. The words the doctor used were really hard to understand, so a lot of the conversation went over my head. That probably has something to do with it. But more than anything else, nothing about this situation felt remotely real to me. That night, finally alone in my darkened hospital room, I flexed my legs and arms thoughtfully. No matter how many times I tested it, my body didn't feel injured. I could move just as freely and easily as before. And maybe Dad was dead, maybe Mom was lying unconscious somewhere in this hospital, but I hadn't seen either of them yet. So maybe everyone telling me about this accident was just lying. Maybe if I were to get up out of bed and head straight home, my parents would be waiting for me there. My thoughts persistently returned to these comforting, paper-thin theories. And more importantly, in the depths of my mind, a clear memory remained. The instant my thoughts brushed against that fragment of the past, I could hear my heart throb violently in my chest. This time, the shrill buzzing that had accompanied the similar incident 3 days earlier was conspicuously absent. In exchange, the most severe headache of my life fell upon me with all the suddenness and force of an avalanche. The sharp burst of pain, as if my body was warning me not to touch an open wound, robbed me of the will to think. Then I'll just stop trying. I'm sick of fainting. As soon as I emptied my mind, the headache vanished with astonishing speed. My breaths came easier, and I could feel my heartbeat gradually returning to its normal rhythm. There's something wrong with my body after all. Nothing like this ever happened to me before that day. As my mind began to reach a conclusion I didn't want to accept, I involuntarily recalled the agony I had just endured. If I remember what happened, that pain will come back. The ensuing wave of terror wiped all else from my mind. Pulling the blankets over my head in search of refuge, I waited for the morning to come. Did that accident they keep talking about really happen? Several days later, that disbelief still lingering in my mind, I was taken to visit my mom in the intensive care unit for the first time. After carefully disinfecting my hands with alcohol, the nurses dressed me up in a hospital gown just like theirs, then finally ushered me into the room, and just as they told me, my mother was inside. But the person lying on the bed in front of me wasn't the mom I knew. There was a huge oxygen mask covering her mouth. Bandages were wrapped around her head. Numerous tubes were sticking out of her body, connecting her to all sorts of machines. The sight reminded me of nothing so much as the Frankenstein monsters I'd seen in movies. But this was reality. That day, the accident happened exactly as they told me, and now my mom was sleeping in a nest of machines. In the instant I finally perceived that undeniable fact as reality, I was struck by a powerful wave of nausea. The hospital room grew dark before me, and in that darkness, a fuzzy image flickered before my eyes, disappearing for the briefest of moments only to re-emerge, like some pale, indistinct horror bobbing up and down just beneath the surface of a muddy lake. Unable to endure the sickness swelling up from the core of my body, I vomited up the contents of my stomach on the spot and was hastily carried out of the room by the nurse who had accompanied me. After that, I tried to return to the ICU numerous times, but the outcome was always the same. The moment I saw my mother in her hospital bed, I experienced severe nausea and was quickly removed from the room. My doctor took these events very seriously and eventually forbid me from visiting Mom for the time being. That night, I laid awake in bed until well after the lights had been turned out, unable to fall asleep. I hadn't suffered any real injury, so sitting around all day often left me with too much physical energy. Sometimes I would go an entire day without feeling hungry or lie awake in bed for hours. And today, the things I'd heard during the daytime were also weighing heavily on my mind. I lay in my bed, staring up at the familiar tiles on the ceiling, and thought about my parents. She might never open her eyes again. Sometimes I'd overhear my uncle talking about it with the nurses in lowered tones. Apparently, Mom was sick with something called a persistent vegetative state. From what I could figure out, that meant the possibility she'd wake up again was really, really low. Mom's going to be asleep forever and ever. In other words, I'd never be able to talk to her again. A bitter frustration welled up inside me at the thought. But no matter how I tried to deny the reality, nothing would change. Even if my parents' job would no longer keep us apart, the blissful days I'd wished for would never return. The more I understood the situation, the heavier my despair grew. Tears spilled relentlessly from my eyes. My mind was filled with a miserable new question. Why? Why had it turned out like this? But in reality, I hadn't been able to see him. And because of that sudden accident, Dad was dead and Mom was sleeping forever. Everything I loved had been taken from me in one horrible instant. When I squeezed my eyes shut in an attempt to escape the cruel reality of my situation, I thought I heard someone's voice in my mind.
ねえ、サチ。どうしてあの時、家を飛び出してしまったの？どうしていい子にしていてくれなかったの？お母さんもお父さんもトラックにはねられて、とてもとても痛かったのよ。
Since the day I accepted that the accident had really happened, these feelings had been lurking unacknowledged in the depths of my mind. That accident happened because of me. If I'd listened to my parents and stayed in the house, they wouldn't have been in the street when that truck ran the red light. Even Yukon, I selfishly tried to manipulate him into coming to the park. Maybe that's why he didn't show up. Maybe he just finally got sick of me. In other words, as I spoke those words, the ringing in my ears returned for the first time in a while, harsher and shriller than ever before. A dull paralysis spread through my body, very similar to what I used to experience before fainting from overexertion on a playground. But the venomous chill crawling up my spine clearly signified that this was something else entirely. Something shadowy and unfamiliar and malevolent was attacking my body. My heart thumped violently in my chest, and in that moment, the world froze around me. The air wasn't cold, it was solid ice, so frigid as to cause physical pain. My clenched teeth began to chatter loudly. My mouth opened wide. I desperately gulped down oxygen in little gasps, every breath a painful struggle. I was wrong. And something even worse is coming next. The voice rang out in my mind again, as I knew it would.
Sachi, どうして?
Yes. Okay, I'll try clicking. So the nightmare began.
どう？さっちゃん、今日は食べられる？
ごめんなさい。食べられます。
そう。
2 weeks after that horrible night, it had become my daily routine to turn aside the spoonfuls of food my nurses offered me. At night, when exhaustion overcame me, I was forced to relive the moment of my parents' accident over and over again. By now, I had completely lost the will to live. The nightmares didn't just play back my memories of that day, they caused me physical agony incomparable to any suffering I endured while awake. My appetite disappeared in a matter of days, and of course, I couldn't get any real rest. After about a week, my body had grown visibly frail, and my natural energy was replaced with lethargy and weakness. 2 days after a concerned nurse reported the situation to my doctor, he came to my bedside and asked me about a bunch of things. Can you hear voices from nowhere in particular? Can you see people who can't really be there? I'm pretty sure the questions were mostly like that. And from my answers, it took the doctor no time at all to announce that I was suffering from a specific illness. To summarize it in his words, a mental illness caused by temporary exposure to catastrophically intense stress. With that diagnosis, it became clear that I'd suffered my own wound in an accident, and my previously scheduled discharge from the hospital was postponed indefinitely. Not that my stay had produced any improvements so far. If anything, it was the opposite. The nightmares still tormented me relentlessly, and my treatment had progressed to medication and the IV tube. Through the tube, the nutrients I needed to survive were pumped directly into my veins. Through powerful sleeping pills, they induced temporary periods of oblivious rest. It felt less like I was living and more like I was being kept alive. One day, this stagnant routine was disrupted slightly. I learned that I had been given permission for an outing as part of a new phase of my treatment.
それじゃあ、あっちの方を歩いてみようか。
I was given permission to leave the hospital, escorted by one of the nurses, on the condition that we stayed well away from both my house and the site of the accident. With no particular destination in mind, we walked aimlessly around the town. Unlike the hospital, which was constantly filled with a sterile antiseptic scent, the town smelled of the season, of people living their ordinary lives. In the distance, I could hear the chattering of grade schoolers on their way home. For the first time in weeks, I wondered vaguely how my friends at school were doing. The change of pace wasn't unpleasant, but my feelings were as dark and clouded as ever. I knew all too well that the physical relief of this moment was only temporary. Unless the doctor drugged me into unconsciousness, I'd see that dream again. The moment of the accident would flash before my eyes over and over, and my body would react as if it were reality, twitching in my bed. If I wept in the dream, I woke up with my eyes swollen and red. If I screamed, "Stop!" in the dream, I woke up with my throat rubbed raw. But worst of all, when the loop finally came to an end, my parents would raise their blood-covered faces from the road and curse me, an incessant, bitter rain of hateful words from which I was powerless to escape. Dad died instantly, and Mom lost consciousness soon after the accident. That last part of the dream was fake. I did understand that rationally, but every morning I awoke to find the burden of guilt resting slightly heavier on my mind. The border between reality and that cruel fiction grew indistinct. It felt entirely possible that horrible nightmare would stay with me for the rest of my life. I had committed the sin of disobedience. That dream was my punishment for treating my parents cruelly when they tried to celebrate my birthday with me.
でも、もしそうな私はこれからどうすればいいの?
It didn't matter how many times I apologized in my dreams. It didn't matter how much suffering those nightmares brought me. This guilt wouldn't simply disappear. It had already grown very nearly unendurable. My heart and mind were on the verge of breaking outright, and still I couldn't find anything close to an answer.
誰か教えてよ。
And as I whispered doubtfully to myself, I noticed a parent and child walking slowly down the sidewalk toward us. A mother, her face clearly troubled, and her young son yanking rudely at her hand.
ねえママ、カツオマンの人形買ってよ。
だからお人形はこの前買ったばかりでしょ。
ああ、それでもカツオマンが欲しいの。ささみ怪人と戦わせるんだもん。
もうまたそんなわがままを言って、いつまでも悪い子でいるとみんなマサヤのことが嫌いになって誰もいなくなっちゃうわよ。
The moment I heard those words, it was as though an icy hand had seized my heart.
やだ、そんなのやだよ。
じゃあお人形は我慢しないとね。
わかった。
そうやってマサヤがいい子でいてくれればお人形もまた買ってあげるからね。
うん。
The mother and child passed by my side, their expressions completely transformed into smiles.
そうか。そうなってしまったのはやっぱり私が言うことを聞かない悪い子だったからあんなことが起こった。お父さんもお母さんもみんな私の前からいなくなったんだ。
muttered those words under my breath, as if to persuade myself they were true, and in the next moment I thought I could hear a switch being flipped inside my head.
だったらいい子になろう。今度こそ本当のいい子に。
After that episode, my body underwent a mysterious change. I went to bed that night without any sleeping pills, but nonetheless reached morning without seeing the nightmare. Since the dreams began, falling asleep without medication had always meant a night of terrible suffering. This sudden exception to the rule surprised me greatly. But I didn't really have any idea why the nightmares would have stopped all of a sudden. I don't know what that was. maybe I just happened to pull the lucky straw this once. As it turned out, however, these worries were unjustified. The nightmares grew steadily less frequent, and my physical condition improved as well. Observing these changes happily, a nurse told me to keep it up, don't let those bad dreams come back. By way of encouragement, I promptly focused on engraving those words into my mind.
悪夢を見ないようにしないといけない。悪夢を見ないようにしないといけない。
Every time I whispered the mantra to myself, a voice rang out in my head. Mustn't be disobedient. A good girl does what she's told. A bad girl doesn't. And when the voice fell silent, that scene flashed through my mind for the briefest of instants. As a warning, as a reminder, I never ever wanted to feel that way again, and so I was determined to become a good girl. If I'm a good girl, I won't lose anything. If I'm a good girl, maybe Mommy and Daddy will forgive me someday.
いい子にならなきゃ。いい子にならなきゃ。いい子にならなきゃ。いい子にならなきゃ。
Over time, my mind was filled with those words. When someone asked me to finish my dinner, I cleaned my plate, even if it meant fighting back nausea to stuff food into my stomach. Before long, I was even capable of lulling myself into unconsciousness if someone told me to go to sleep right away after lights out.
はい、わかりました。
Whenever I said those words and nodded my assent, the nurses called me a good girl with smiles on their faces. And whenever I heard that phrase, I could feel my sin growing ever so slightly lighter, my sense of self ever so slightly weaker. It took some time afterward, but eventually I was discharged from the hospital, conditional on my return for thorough regular checkups. The reason, naturally, was that my painful nightmares had grown extremely rare, and my sleep and eating habits had returned to normal. The rapid and dramatic improvement in my symptoms did quite surprise my doctor and nurses, but I'm fairly sure that adults convinced themselves my little trip outside the hospital for a change of pace had simply succeeded beyond their expectations. However, the doctors did think it best for me to leave my hometown and the many painful memories it held behind. It was decided that I would live with my uncle Akihiro and his wife at their home in Niigata. I'd never visited my uncle's house even once until the day I moved there, but I didn't feel any anxiety about my life in a new life in a new land. I did know that my uncle and auntie were kind people, and above all else, I had a clearly defined path to follow. No matter what my circumstances, I was determined to be a good girl. After all, my new conviction had virtually cured me of those unendurable nightmares. Since Uncle Akihiro was kind enough to carefully prepare everything beforehand, the move went off without a hitch. It was decided that I'd transfer into a nearby school after my first week in Niigata. As it turned out, it was a modestly sized school with a fairly small student body. I was the first transfer student in recent memory, and received a significant amount of curious gazes as a result. Heard she got caught up in something nasty. Didn't somebody say she got bullied really badly at her last school? At times I heard such rumors whispered in the hallways. Not that any of it bothered me in the slightest. I was entirely focused on making up for the time I'd lost in the hospital. I hadn't even touched a textbook for some time. A good girl does well in school. So as to keep myself from diverging with that image, I threw myself fervently into my classes, filling every waking moment with study and regretting the need to sleep.
おめえすげえな。なんでそんげん勉強できるか。
あっちで塾とか通ってたが。塾には行ったことないけど、勉強は嫌いじゃないから。へえ、じゃあサチちゃんって頭がいいがね。
じゃあ今度わからないところがあったら教えてくれさ。
わかった。
Over time, my diligent new approach to life changed the way my classmates viewed me. By the time we advanced to the next grade, many looked at me with respect in their eyes. In addition, on the theory that a good girl helps others, I would proactively approach those who seemed troubled and offered my assistance. Just by chasing after my ideal in this way, at some point a crowd gathered around me. As in my previous school, everyone in the class started calling me Sachin, and I made lots of friends who would invite me out to play. My uncle, who'd been worried about how I'd adapt to living in the country, was very pleased by all this, and my teachers offered consistent praise for my efforts in the classroom and helpful attitude. The harder I tried, the nicer everyone was, and I tried very hard indeed. The compliments and smiling faces reminded me of the happiest days of my life, when my parents had been kind to me. I grew steadily more convinced that my new way of thinking was correct. But such universal, unreserved affection for good people doesn't last beyond childhood. As if to warn me of that fact, when I advanced to the next level of school, I found the emotionally charged malice characteristic of adolescence waiting for me. After a few months, I got thoroughly settled in at my new school. Once again, I attracted a crowd of friendly faces. For the most part, they asked to see my homework, for assistance in some extracurricular activity, or help with their studies. And as I reliably satisfied these requests, the number of people who approached me steadily increased. Apparently, there's this super talented saint in Class 1C. Such rumors spread across the school, and I became something of a minor celebrity, and in time, I began to encounter those who found that irksome. Among them, a girl named Hitomi Nakano from my class. Most labeled her a delinquent, and she kept herself largely aloof from the rest of the class, so it came as something of a surprise when, one day, she suddenly called out to me.
ねえ小峰、今日の掃除当番変わってよ。
いいよ。
そう。じゃあお願いね。
It began with that trivial favor, no different from those I performed for countless others. But Hitomi Nakano repeated that request every time it was her turn to clean the classroom. Of course, I continued to readily accept. And one day, after this pattern had continued for some time,
小峰、今日もお願いね。
いいよ。どうかした？
あんたさ、毎回掃除当番変わらせられて、なんとも思わないわけ？
思わないけど、どこか変かな。
だってさ、私は明らかにあんたのことパシリにしてるんだよ。それって
いじめは いじめられる側に自覚があれば成立するって言われているけど、だとしたら私にその自覚はないからいじめじゃないんじゃないかな。
それ本気で
だって人の言うことを聞くのがいい子で聞かないのは悪い子でしょ。私はその考えに従ってるだけだから。
は？じゃあ何？あんた、私が永遠に掃除当番変われって言ったら変わってくれる？
中野さんがそう言うならそうするよ。
へえ、言うじゃん。じゃあさ、掃除当番は変わらなくていいから一人でこの学校の窓全部拭いて回って、どう？できないでしょ。
いいよ。
Although I accepted Nakano-san's request, she didn't seem particularly pleased. In fact, she clicked her tongue in disgust and stalked right out of the classroom. What was she so angry about? Thinking the matter over, I took out a supply of cleaning implements from my locker. And just as directed, I made my way around the school, cleaning the windows. After our classroom, I moved on to the other first-year rooms, the hallway, and the faculty room, making steady progress. Once the school building was closed, however, my pace was slowed somewhat by the need to hide from the patrolling teachers. Nonetheless, I persevered at my task. Even after the sun fell, I continued wiping in dogged silence. My arms quickly grew heavy from the sustained effort of reaching up to clean the higher windows, and after a few hours my shoulders were screaming with pain. Even so, I kept my hands moving. I had my directions, and I had to obey them. My personal circumstances were irrelevant. My body might ache or suffer injury, but neither mattered so long as it could move. If movement were to become impossible, I would simply reassess the situation and attempt to find an alternate means to accomplish my task. At the moment, wiping all of the windows in this school clean took priority above all else. When she found me in the hallway the next morning, still wiping windows, Hitomi Nakano's jaw dropped open.
あんた、何やってるの？
何って言われた通りに窓を拭いてるんだけど。
言われた通りにって、まさか本当にあれからずっと学校の窓を拭いてたわけ？
さすがに学校が広いから今日の授業が始まるまでにっていうのは無理だったけど、もう少し時間をもらえればちゃんと終わるから。
For a brief moment, her eyes went wide, and in the next, she roared with laughter.
あんた、間違いなくいい子だよ。それは私が保証して。
ありがと
お礼まで言って。こいつ。小峰、窓拭きはここで終わりでいいわよ。
そうなの？
ええ。その代わり、今日からあんたは私の
わかった。
やっぱり。じゃあこれから私に対しては敬語を使うこと。それから私が何か命令をした時の返事は「はい、わかりました」。
はい、わかりました。
そうそう。
ありがとうございます。
I didn't particularly hesitate at the prospect of becoming a slave. If that was what she wanted from me, and if it was within my power to play that role, I had no reason to object. And so, having assumed the position of Hitomi Nakano's obedient minion, carrying out her orders became the central element of my new daily routine.
Komine, あとはよろしくね。
はい、わかりました。
I can't quite remember how many times we repeated this exchange. It happened too often for me to be sure. My more common duties involved completing her homework by proxy, helping her cheat on tests, and arranging cruel pranks against those she disliked. There were other requests as well. Every once in a while, she'd call for me in the middle of the night simply to mock me for actually showing up. After laughing with her friends, she would send me right back home. But that was alright with me. I was her slave, so all I needed to concern myself with was executing her commands. No matter how difficult the orders she gave me, through careful thought and diligent effort, I would always find a method of carrying them out. When I succeeded, her mood would often improve. On occasion, she even offered a few words of praise for her good girl. But more than anything else, simply obeying someone's instructions was pleasant in itself. While executing her orders, there was no need to think about anything else. The reason for those orders, the consequences of successfully carrying them out, anything and everything else was totally irrelevant. In those moments alone, the burden of guilt I carried with me was lifted from my shoulders, and the image I wanted to erase from my mind more than anything else stayed safely buried away. Therefore, there was nothing wrong about this. A good girl does what she's told. I believed absolutely in those words. For me, they had become a kind of faith. However, not everyone saw things the same way. After about 2 years as her slave, my master began to show some signs of discontentment with our arrangement. When I answered her orders with a prompt, "Yes, certainly," and a nod, I could see a flash of irritation in her eyes. Perhaps as a result, I soon noticed that those orders had begun to escalate in scale and difficulty, and when I returned to report my success, she'd respond only with a displeased grunt. Eventually, I asked whether I'd done something to offend her.
何でもできることがムカつく。
And that was her admittedly rather irrational answer. Naturally, I then inquired of whether I should fail every so often, but
はあ？あんた私のことバカにしてんの？
this inspired only a more pronounced scowl.
でも失敗させてみるっていうのも悪く。じゃあさ、あんたに最後の命令を出してあげる。
最後の命令。
そう。2週間後にある中間テスト。あれ、泣く？
テスト？
人の言うことを聞くのがいい子だって言うなら、こういうお願いも聞いてくれるよね。どうなの？やれるの？
はい、私はいい子ですから。
言ったわね。いい？一度やるって言ったんだから、絶対やんなさいよ。後で。やっぱりできませんでした。すみませんって謝ってきても、私は絶対に許さないからね。
はい、わかりました。
From the moment I nodded my head, it was perhaps all but decided that I would end up in Mihama Academy. When she asked me if I was up for it, I heard a voice screaming, "Don't," from some corner of my mind. But soon enough, as the image of that day began to flicker its own warning before my eyes, that voice of caution was obliterated without a trace. There was nothing left to stop me. For the next few days, I frantically racked my brains in search of a method to get rid of the scheduled midterm tests. How about stealing the tests before they can copy them? No, even if I were to find the originals, the tests would be recreated. At most, I would earn a brief delay. In that case, how about copying the test secretly and bringing her the answers? No, while that might ensure her a perfect score in her exams, the tests themselves would be held as usual.
じゃあどうすればいい？ どうすればテストをなくすことができるの？
The more ideas I ran through, the more I realized the enormous difficulty of the task at hand. My focus grew slowly more intense and obsessive. My thoughts ran in circles. To make matters worse, as the day of the test grew inexorably closer, I began to see the familiar nightmares I had thought behind me. And so, driven slowly but surely into desperation, I finally arrived at my conclusion.
だったら学校をなくしちゃえばいいんだ。学校がなくなってしまえばテストも授業も全部なくなってしまう。
The moment I spoke those words, my ears filled with a high-pitched, almost nostalgic buzzing, and my consciousness was shrouded in fog. When I came to my senses, I was standing inside my school. At my feet were a pile of kerosene cans, the same sort my uncle stockpiled as fuel for our heaters. Presumably, I had carried them from my house to this building over the course of numerous round trips. And indeed, my arms and shoulders were throbbing with agony. The situation was clear enough. Moving as though possessed, I emptied the cans all around the building in what felt like minutes, ignoring the protests of my exhausted body, and in the end, I stood in my classroom and set the fire. The instant I dropped my match into the kerosene, flames sprouted up as though I'd flipped the switch on a stovetop. The fire spread rapidly down the streets of oil and into the hallway. In the blink of an eye, the fire spread and grew. Beating off the wooden walls and desks, consuming the paper textbooks and cloth bags my classmates had left behind, the flames danced before my eyes. Even from a distance, I felt their just as I observed that it was becoming a slightly painful to breathe the heated air, the shrill sound of the fire alarm began to resound throughout the building. The classroom I had studied in only yesterday was consumed in a order of sea of fire. And yet, even as a part of my world vanished before my eyes, I felt something ridiculous. Look at it burn. The thoughts running through my mind were nothing but the disinterested impressions of a casual spectator. Having determined that it would be impossible to stay in this place any longer, I carefully exited the classroom through the nearest window. As I lowered myself onto the grass outside, I could hear the sound of distant sirens. How far would the flames reach before that fire engine arrived? How much damage before they could extinguish the blaze? No, it no longer mattered. The midterm exams would doubtless be cancelled regardless. I carried out my orders. I did what I was told. I was still a good girl. Yes. And as long as I'm a good girl, nothing else matters. So this is Sachi's past, huh? Although the fire brigade rushed to the scene and extinguished the flames before the building could suffer much structural damage, the main classrooms were reduced to charred wrecks. As it contained the highest concentration of flammable materials in the building, the faculty room suffered particularly severe damage, and the scheduled midterm examinations had to be postponed indefinitely. Rumors that Sachi had been responsible spread quickly throughout the town, and when interviewed by the police, she immediately confessed to total responsibility for the incident. However, her motivation was unclear, and testimony from her classmates revealed that Sachi had been subjected to chronic bullying. Her confession was deemed unreliable, and suspicion came to rest on her tormentors. In the end, the investigators couldn't find any decisive evidence identifying the responsible party, and the arson case was closed without charges. news. Nonetheless, Sachi's aunt and uncle were disturbed by her confession and abnormal behavior throughout the incident. They had her receive a comprehensive psychiatric examination from a specialist, leading to a secondary diagnosis. Given her overall condition, they were told it would be ill-advised and potentially dangerous for Sachi to continue attending a normal school. Soon after, it was arranged for her to transfer to Mihama Academy. In other words, witnessing that accident had damaged Sachi's mind far more severely than was immediately apparent. Considering what I knew of her current mindset, I doubt she even regards setting that fire as a mistake. Today, Sachi remains under the guardianship of her childless uncle and aunt. Her mother is still in the hospital, deep in a persistent coma. That would be a rough summary of how things currently stand. I toss the papers down onto the bench and look up into the sky. In other words, there's a lot more to Sachi than what I've seen so far. Back then, the only thing I knew was that Sachi's parents were busy with work and didn't pay much attention to her anymore. In these documents are business-like summaries pulled from Ichigai's databases. I have the basic facts in sufficient detail to speculate, but it's hardly a comprehensive story. At the moment, Sachi's probably the only person in the world who knows the precise nature of the suffering that reshaped her personality so dramatically. Even so, there's one thing I can say for certain. She suffered an incredibly cruel and abrupt loss at a young age. These 6 flimsy sheets of paper couldn't possibly have contained everything she went through.
Hi. 私はお父さんもお母さんも大好きでした。
From the way Sachi spoke those words, I think they were absolutely true, and that means she saw the people she loved most in the world fatally injured before her eyes. In the reports, her parents are described as a hardworking couple who cared deeply for their daughter. Their reputation in the neighborhood was excellent. Even without knowing the details of their relationship with Sachi, it's easy to understand that losing them would have been shocking and painful under any circumstances. What's more, it happened on her birthday. And from the dates, it must have been the day after I said goodbye. At the time, my friendship with the girl in the playground had become my strongest source of emotional support, if the same had been true for Sachi as well. In a single day, she lost her closest family members and her closest friend. So, those words she's so fond of. Good girl, bad girl. She tried to drag me to the playground with an arbitrary promise. She ran out of her house that day without listening to her parents, and all of a sudden, she found herself alone. Her thought process isn't difficult to imagine. I was a selfish, bad girl, and everyone went away. From now on, I have to be a good girl and do what I'm told. Carried to an extreme, that's no different from turning yourself into an obedient, thoughtless robot. When the teachers tell her to work hard at her studies, she works hard. When some idiot tells her to wear a neat uniform, she never takes it off. Her own will and the intentions behind the orders are irrelevant. Performing them to the letter is the whole point. Doing what she's told is an end in itself. Sachi was only a child at the time. This simplistic, obsessive obedience was the sole coping method she could find, the only way she could escape her regret and guilt. No one has the right to blame her for that. Sachi stopped thinking for herself as a self-defense mechanism. Her wounds were so severe that she lost the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. That warped, absolute allegiance to her principles culminated in the school arson incident. To take the most extreme possible example, if someone unambiguously ordered Sachi to kill someone right now, she might commit murder without hesitation. The commandment she imposed on herself is a dangerous thing, a brittle wall as likely to harm as protect. All things considered, might have been lucky that it was only arson. The more people know about Sachi's abnormality, the greater the risk of someone attempting to exploit it. An event like that was all but inevitable. For the same reason, it makes sense that she was transferred to this academy with a small student body and limited contact with the outside world. The question now is whether I can actually do anything with this knowledge. I might be sitting here and analyzing other people's abnormalities, but I'm not a well-adjusted person myself by any stretch of the imagination. Can I, of all people, help someone regain normality? If there's one thing that gives me hope, it's the expression I saw on Sachi's face back then. Thinking it over now, I'm even more firmly convinced that her smiles have always been artificial, forced things. But just that once, something was clearly different, something that makes me think I can bring her back. Might sound like flimsy grounds for optimism, but at our first meeting, my master took one look at me and declared, "We can still fix this one. That's why I'm here today." Come to think of it, my master told me something once. Accepting a favor isn't anything to be ashamed of, kid, but not returning it is. There's no need to overthink this. From that perspective, it's really very simple. Back then, Sachi's presence in my life saved me, and today I have a chance to repay the favor. That's enough for now.
変えようとしているのは小峰さんだけじゃないのかもしれないわね。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。ごめんな。どうしたのよ、サチ？
これうなされてるのよね。それにすごい汗。とりあえず起こしちゃった方がいいわね。よくわからないけど、勝手にそんなことしちゃってもいいものなの？夢を見てるくらいなら問題ないって。それにこのまま放っておいた方が体力奪われちゃうから。そうね。じゃあ私が。ねえサチ、起きなさい。サチ。 ダメ、呼びかけたくらいじゃ起きてくれない。それならどいてチルチル、今度は私がやってみるのよさ。おいサッチン、サッチンってば起きるのよさ。サチよかった、目が覚めたんだな、サッチン。それに他にもアマネーと黒いのも一緒なのよさ。それにここ、ああ、三島崎にある病院よ。病院、そうでした。私一度気を失って。そう、それでお見舞いに来たら小峰さんがうなされていたから起こさせてもらったわ。すみません、皆さんにご迷惑をおかけしてしまって。さっちゃんが謝ることないって。ねえサチ、あんたさっきの夢。みちる、それ以上はダメ。あ、そっか。どうしてみちる様が謝るのでしょう。本当に何でもないから、あんたも気にしないでよ。はい、わかりました。まあほら、無事にさっちゃんが見つかってこうして話すことができたんだからよかったじゃん。アマネーの言う通りなのよ。サッチンがいなくなってめちゃくちゃ心配したのよさ。私も探す手間くらいはかけたわね。すみません、いろいろとご迷惑をおかけしてしまいまして。ほらユミコ、あんたがそんなこと言うからまたサッチが謝っちゃうでしょ。私は本当のことを言ったまでだけど。だとしてもそれを言わないのが友達ってもんでしょうが。本当にすみません。いいっていいって。だってさっちゃんはユージと約束した場所で待ってただけなんでしょ。はい、約束しましたから。そっか、だったらさっちゃんは何も悪くない。うん。あまねさん、さすがアマネーなのよ。心の大きさが胸に負けてないのよさ。それは言えてるかもしれないわね。榊さんまで。まあ今はゆっくり休んで早く元気になるのがサチの仕事だからね。はい、わかりました。いでマーキーな、動くと危ないって。だってアマネーのブラッシングが強引すぎるのよさ。
When I enter the dorm for the first time in 3 days, I'm greeted by the familiar sight of Amane grooming Makina in the lobby. Hey, Amane. Oh, Sachi's scheduled to leave the hospital today, right? I mean, they both were.
So
out of the dorm for 3 days.
ユージ?
They both have been out of the dorm for 3 days.
今までどこで何してたの？
Well, here and there.
ああ、ちょっとなっちゃないわよ。さっちゃんが見つかって安心したかと思ったら、今度はユージがいなくなっちゃったってみんな心配してたんだよ。
Sorry, I had a job come in and then I needed to butter up JB for a while. Couldn't quite find the time to come back.
JB さんを説得？
Well, I guess you could say that was part of the job too.
じゃあ仕事なら仕事だって一言言ってくれればよかったのに。
そうなのよさ。チルチルなんか頭にラップを巻いてうーなりながら深夜徘徊してたくらいなのよ。
I think that's just a regular scheduled maintenance.
でもそれを聞いてきたってことはユージもさっちゃんの隊員に付き合ってくれるってこと？
Actually, I was going to ask if you'd let me take care of that by myself.
ごめん。どうして一人で？
私とサッチンくらいの仲になると退院の瞬間を一緒に分かち合いたくなるのが当然ってもんなのよさ。
Yeah, I do understand that you'd want to be there. This is just me being selfish, but the thing is, I've got something important to discuss with Sachi, so it'd be more convenient if we could have some privacy.
二人っきりだと？
Yeah, I do. Don't worry. I'm planning to fill you in afterward.
なるほどね。
Amane rests her hand on her chin and nods thoughtfully.
わかった。ユージがそう言うなら私たちはここで。
バカな。知らぬ間に意見をまとめられていたのよさ。
だってほら病院に行かなくてもさっちゃんとはすぐに会えるんだしさ。そう考えたら意固地になる必要もないでしょ。無言でお尻見るな。私が言ってるのはお尻の病気じゃなくてそこまでムキになる必要はないってこと。
その物分かりの良さはすでにフランスパンあたりで買収済みか？
パンで釣られるのはあんたくらいでしょうが。てかユージがわがまま言うなんて珍しいことじゃん。
言われてみればそうなのよさ。
I'm not particularly conscious of that myself, but I guess I'll have to take their word for it.
ってわけでマキナもそれでいいでしょ。おやつも作ってあげるからさ。
いいのかシェフ。私の舌はわがままだぞ。
はいはい、精一杯腕を振るわせていただきますよ。
Sorry, you two.
いいっていいって。その代わり荷物とかはちゃんと持ってあげてよね。
Yeah, of course.
病室でエロいことすんなよ。
Yeah, of course.
今返事までにわずかなラグが見受けられたのよさ。
そりゃああんたの質問に呆れただけだってば。
When I quietly open the door to her hospital room, I find Sachi up and about, neatly folding her blankets next to the bed. I bet good money you're one of those people who make their own bed when staying in a hotel.
なぜそのことを。
Anybody could guess from a look at this little scene. Well, if they weren't distracted by the completely out-of-place maid outfit first.
退院の時は制服だろというご指摘があればすぐに着替えますが。
Well, I don't think it's exactly a formal occasion or anything.
でしたらなるべくと言われていますので、ここはメイド服を着させていただきますね。
Right. There's an awkward moment before I can manage to respond. Now that I know about Sachi's principles, those typical words inspired a twinge of something like pity. Alright, I'll take care of the bedding.
ですが
You're still recovering. Spare the back talk for another time, alright?
風見さんがそうおっしゃるのでしたらすみませんがよろしくお願いします。
Sure. Changing places with Sachi at the side of her bed, I quickly remove the sheets and begin to fold the mattress. As I work, Sachi stares intently at my face. You have something you want to ask me? Go ahead.
ではどうして風見さんがここに？
There's something strange about me coming to pick you up from the hospital?
いえ、そんなことはないのですが、私が入院している間、風見さんは一度もいらっしゃらなかったので。
Oh, you miss me?
というより、風見さんは私のことを怒っているのではないかと思っていました。
And why would you think that?
それは公園で会った風見さんが悲しそうな顔をされていたので。
I see, so that's it.
はい。
As he speaks, Sachi's expression is distinctly downcast. Not a look you see on her face often. Normally, Sachi can present an expression of unperturbed, detached calm under virtually any circumstances. This must have been bothering her a great deal, and if so... Actually, Sachi, I had something I wanted to discuss with you. It's sort of related to your question just now.
私にお話ですか？
Yeah, it's kind of important.
というと、商店街の角にあるタバコ屋さんの奥さんの不倫相手がついに判明したのでしょうか？
That's important to you.
何を言っているんですか、風見さん。商店街は夏休み前からその話題で持ちきりですよ。
That a fact? We seem to have gotten a bit sidetracked here. Anyway, let's finish up here first. We can talk after.
はい、わかりました。
で、小峰さんが戻ってきて早々、全員が集められたのはなぜなのかしら。
Okay, I'll see a little more.
それからどうして制服を着て教室集合なのかもね。
Immediately after returning from the hospital with Sachi, I arranged for all our dorm mates to gather in the classroom, resulting in this admittedly justifiable barrage of questions. Sorry to stand on ceremony and all, but this is something of a formal report, so I figured it couldn't hurt to have an appropriate setting. Yeah, in order to ensure Mihama Academy remains a harmonious living environment for everyone here, there's something I need to announce to all of you immediately. Well, to get straight to the point, Sachi and I are dating now. I draw Sachi up to my side by the waist, say what needs to be said, and wait. The classroom goes dead silent for a while. Our four classmates, scattered randomly across the room, stare up at us. A range of uncomprehending and quizzical expressions frozen on their faces. In the end, the first to break the increasingly awkward stalemate is Sachi.
あまり驚かれていないみたいですね。
いや十分すぎるほど驚いてるってば。
その割には皆さん落ち着かれているように見えたのですが。
落ち着いてたっていうか、びっくりして言葉が出なかっただけなんだ。
私なんて冗談抜きで心臓が止まりかけたんだから。そうなのよ。ただでさえ危ういチルチルの脳細胞に血がいかなくなって、さらに残念なことになるところだったのよさ。そうよそうよ。
バカにされてることに気づかないところは確かに残念ね。
何？
Okay, mature is one thing, but I didn't really expect the rest of you to have trouble getting your heads around this.
いや、言葉の意味は把握してるんだけど、なんていうかいろいろ唐突すぎてさ。
最近2人の仲が良かったのは知っていたのだけど、ここまでの展開はさすがに予想してなかったのよさ。
そうね。今日がエイプリルフールだとしても、タチの悪い冗談だわ。
Hold it, Sakaki. Two things. One, it's July. Two, what are you planning to do with that?
それはあなたの返答次第ね。
Alright, I'll say this again as unambiguously as I can. Sachi and I really are dating, not a joke. When I declare the matter in the simplest possible terms, a brief silence settles on the classroom for the second time in the last few minutes.
小峰さん、風見くんの言っていることは本当なの？
はい、実は先ほど病院からの帰り道で。
Okay then, Sachi. As for that important discussion,
はい、
I want you to be my girlfriend. Alright with you?
はい、風見さんがそうおっしゃるのでしたら。ということがありまして。
で、サッチンは2つ返事で OK したと？
そうだね。
何その、なあ、サッカー部に入らないか？まあお前がそう言うならみたいなノリは。
ですが、実際にそういうノリでしたし。
いや、ノリがそうだったとしても、それくらいの気持ちで OK しちゃっていいの？
というと？
ほら、付き合うってことは恋人になるってことでしょ？そう考えたら、普通は好きな者同士っていうのが基本じゃない？
はい、それは天音さんの言う通りだと思います。
なら、ズバリ聞くけれど、小峰さんは風見くんのことをどう思っているの？
風見さんのことは嫌いではありません。
じゃあ、好きなのかしら？
それはよくわかりません。
The moment those words leave Sachi's mouth, the tense atmosphere in the classroom softens rapidly.
わからないか。
ユージの隣に席を移した時も同じようなこと言ってたし、それが正直なところなんじゃないの？
だとしたら、ひとまずは安心かもしれないわね。
And the aggressive inquisitors who seemed just about ready to physically go for my throat a minute ago, not in apparent satisfaction. I don't quite follow, but does this mean none of you have any objections?
んなわけないでしょうが。今のあんたはサチが頼み事を断れないいい子だってことを利用して交際を迫ってるようなもんなのよ。
I'm not holding a gun to her head, am I?
たとえそうだとしても
Hey, Sachi, if you don't like this idea, I'm completely fine with you turning me down, alright? You can be honest. So, keeping that in mind, I'm going to ask one more time. You willing to be my girlfriend?
はい、私は風見さんとお付き合いをすることが嫌なわけではありませんから。
There, straight from the horse's mouth.
くー、だからってそういう聞き方は卑怯よ。
Okay, let me ask you something. How would a fair romance work exactly? Pursuing someone romantically means trying to monopolize their affection. Of course, you use everything you can to try and get a foot in the door. Love's fundamentally selfish. I don't see any real difference between my strategy here and, say, your tsundere thing, or Mane and her chest bubber attacks. Am I wrong?
ぐー、なんだろう。言ってることはめちゃくちゃなはずなのに、この妙な説得力は。でも。
Alright. I'm not unsympathetic to your complaints. If you feel Sachi's consent isn't enough under the circumstances, I'll provide you with an even better argument.
そんなものがあったのよ。
Yeah, truth is, I've kept this quiet until now, but
いたんだが
Sachi and I are childhood friends. And so the third silence settles on the classroom.
じゃあしょうがないかも。
松島さん、どうしてこんな理由で説得されているのよ。
だって幼なじみって言ったらツンデレよりメジャーどころじゃない。
そういう問題か。
サチン、お兄ちゃんの言ってることは本当。
はい、私と風見さんは幼い頃にしばらく一緒に遊んでいたことがありました。
Incidentally, back then we called each other Sachan and Yukin.
ゆうくん、榊さんが照れてどうするの。
That's not all. Back in the day, we kissed on a regular basis.
正確には唇対頬でしたので、キスというよりはチューと呼んだ方がいいかもしれません。
チューがサチンはロリってた頃も大胆だったんだな。
これが若気の至りというものでしょうか。
ちょっと若すぎるけどね。
So anyway, put a romantic spin on all this, and you could call it a miracle that Sachi and I were reunited here.
奇跡だなんて、そんなのただの偶然だわ。
Call it what you want. The odds of us meeting again were incredibly low, probably millions to one, yet here we are. Also, how a romance starts off isn't the most important thing. What matters is how you grow into it.
紡いでいく？
Yeah. I know Sachi probably doesn't have clear romantic feelings for me yet. But when I found her, she'd been waiting for me in the pouring rain for an entire day, without even an umbrella. I've been thinking things over seriously ever since then, and I've made up my mind. I want to see her happy, so I'm going to make that happen, whatever it takes. I'll protect Sachi to the extent she's comfortable with, and I won't make her regret becoming my girlfriend. I can promise you people can. Still have a problem? Find someone who can make her happier than I can, and I'll gladly step aside, but not until then. Seems I've reduced Amane to illiterate grunts.
だってユージにそこまで言われたら、そう言ってもらえなかった私たちは何も言えなくなっちゃうじゃない。
Amane's tone of voice is vaguely sulky, not unexpected in her case, but I'm slightly surprised to see Sagaki and Michiru showing similar mixed emotions on their faces.
O兄ちゃんにここまで言わせたサッチンの勝ちってことだな。
勝ち？
サッチンは風見雄二という男を奪い合う戦いに見事勝利したのよ。
そうなんだ。
Okay, let's try this again. You willing to accept our relationship?
お前らそこんとこどうなのよ。ここまで言われたら認めるしかないんじゃない？
そうね。
私もそう思う。ということらしいのよさ。
Thanks for the summary, but what about you, Makina?
私はもともと聞き分けのいい良い子だから、あまりとやかく言うつもりはないのよさ。ただし、もし私の可愛いサッチンが泣くようなことがあったら、すぐに異議申し立てをさせてもらうのよ。
Sounds about right.
ならよろしい。ねえあまね、なんだか私マキナがすっごい大人に見えてきたんだけど。
Seems like I managed to persuade them for the time being. Alright then, looks like we're pretty much done here. Sachi and I are going to head out now.
というと、この後も何か予定が？
Yeah, wanted to talk some stuff over now that things are official. Alright, waiter, let's go, Sachi.
ぎょい。
Sach.
もう変なあだ名つけてる。早速恋人気取りなのよさ。てか、その恋人に対してギョイって返事はどうなのよ。しかも2人が幼なじみだったなんてね。
確かに言いたいことは山ほどあるわ。でも時にはああいう強引さが人を癒すのかもしれないわね。
After heading out onto the roof with Sachi until I leaned back against the tall wire fence and exhale. Our classmates' reactions were a little unpredictable, but in the end I managed to get their consent, if not approval. With our relationship established, I'll be able to spend more time around Sachi without it seeming unnatural. Simply being there should be a good first step. Sachi stands at my side with typically excellent posture, staring off vaguely into the distance as if lost in thought. Sort of threw things into a commotion the instant you got out of the hospital, didn't I? You feeling alright?
はい3日もお休みをいただいたので体はすっかり元通りです
That effect?
はい
Even so, she responds to my question immediately, turning toward me with a pleasant smile on her face. Okay, I will stop now. Yeah, it's a lot. again, pretty long. But I really do want to see a lot of this. So they're really putting them together because of the childhood friend thing. That's what they're going to do with Sachi. Interesting. Bye!